Hey everybody, our fantasies, they're busted. Well, at least that's what Zezik says, but I'm already getting way ahead of myself, so let's go back.
A few things you should keep in mind before you dive in. First, Zizek is a mouthful, not to mention English isn't his first language. So if you're struggling along the way, it's not just you. So if you've watched a section twice and you're still like, what? Just keep going, and I promise you'll understand what he's saying again in just a minute. Ideology is actually supposed to be hard to see and confusing to talk about for reasons I'll get to in just a minute. His point is just that our ideology is reflected in our media, and then our media shapes our ideology. But both our media fantasies and our ideologies are usually full of contradictions, which we can spot if we look with a critical eye. This is a class focused on visual media, but Zizek would remind us that these concepts apply to all media: audible, textual, smelling like baking bread or barbecue, all of it. Second, Zizek isn't arguing for or against any real ideology, but since we normally don't talk about ideology in the US, whenever we hear someone say something specific about our ideology, something we normally don't hear said out loud, our natural reaction can be to assume that they're being critical of it. That's not his point here. Well, aside from when he gets to the Nazi fascist section around 43 minutes in, he is pretty critical of them. But if you hear something that sounds critical of your ideology, listen again. He's probably just explaining it. When, for example, he says that Starbucks is playing on our ideology to sell us overpriced coffee around 57 minutes in, he's not necessarily being critical of Starbucks. He's actually drinking Starbucks when he says it. Same with religion. At different points in this movie, you could think Zizek was a hardcore Christian, and then at other times he seems to be kind of critical of Christianity. But he's actually just trying to talk about how Christianity works, how it catches the hearts and changes the views of people who use it. Once you grasp it, you see the world differently. The point is, mentioning the normally unmentioned can still sound critical even when it's not. With that lengthy preamble in place, let's talk about Zizek, who, as you can see, is always well dressed, and his theories about ideology in visual media. Now, Zizek is going to argue here that our films are fantasies, and that the only way they work as fantasies, or as escape, is by providing entryways into the narrative for lots of different viewers who have different ideologies. If a film or a song is a hit, that's because lots of people listened to it or watched it. It spoke to a lot of people who resonated with it because it reminded them that they're stronger than the breakup they just went through, or that they're capable of seeking that promotion, or maybe that they're happy in their assurance that they will spend eternity in heaven. The same piece of music gives that to all those different people. A good piece of media will catch as many people as possible from multiple ideological angles by giving them their own way to apply their own personal beliefs, fantasies, desires, struggles, and goals to seemingly unconnected stand-in characters: a shark in Jaws, a series of notes in Beethoven's music, a set of lyrics in a pop song, a set of sunglasses that allow people to see the real world in They Live, a superhero who kicks the nemesis' butt, Rose and Jack in Titanic. We see our own beliefs and dreams in these characters. If a piece of media doesn't resonate with people in this way, then it won't be widely distributed and popular. And because of this, we can view popular media as a gauge for public ideology. What's reflected on screen will also be reflected to some degree in the audience. So what the heck does Zizek mean when he says ideology? Well, his quote from 46 minutes and 30 seconds gets pretty close. He says that he imagines ideology as, quote, a kind of filter or frame, so that if you look at the same ordinary reality through that frame, everything changes. Think about videos from January 6th and how you almost certainly talk to somebody who sees the same videos yet comes to a different conclusion as to what happened based on a pre-existing ideology. Like, well, Trump is the best president ever and the savior of our country, so he couldn't have made that happen no matter what my eyes tell me. Our pre-existing beliefs decide how we see something. Is it good or bad? Sin or blessing? Scary or fun? Dangerous or courageous? Other people see those same clips and say, of course Trump was responsible. I know he's that sort of person. Ideology. You can also get a glimpse of your own ideology if you ask yourself something like, what if you woke up tomorrow with a huge surprise? A good one that made you feel better about your lot in life. What could that surprise be? In a capitalist culture, the obvious answer many of us just shot out was money. Lots of it. I mean, what can't be fixed with that? But some of us would also have religious answers to that question, like, I'd love an assurance that me and my loved ones have a place reserved in heaven. Or maybe I'd love a true understanding of some religious principle I've struggled with. And others might really value, say, celebrity culture. So maybe they woke up with a new connection to Ariana Grande. Like you're her long lost sibling and she's trying to track you down to do an album together or something. And of course, you probably don't talk about these deep desires or even notice them every day, but they're the taken for granted short answers you have to make your life easier. Humans are basically shortcut machines. Our goal in life is to come up with quick, simple answers to all the questions flying at us all day so we can save our mental processing power for those questions that are really important, like, is that a lion in the bushes sneaking up to eat me? So to sum up so far, art and media are fantasy lands where we escape our real lives. And they only work that way if they allow lots of different people their own pathway into them, a way to use our own pre-existing beliefs about the world as a basic guide for understanding what's going on in the film. And we do this because we are always looking for a short, sweet answer that doesn't require much thought so that we can get back to doing whatever we were doing and watching out for lions. But it actually gets more complicated than that, because humans are also huge liars, mostly to ourselves. We rationalize unhealthy behavior or bad treatment of others instead of holding ourselves accountable. We ignore the terrible things that happen all around us to pay attention to our own lives, while also assuring ourselves throughout the day that we're good people and we're doing what we can to make the world a better place. Most of us practice religions that we never really bother to think about all that hard, and we certainly don't stop to challenge them when we encounter a what the heck, that doesn't sound right claim. We tend to just ignore those things that should tell us we need to go back to the drawing board and keep looking for the truth so that we can rest cozy in this illusion that we've already found the truth. Another great example of this is found in parole boards who have repeatedly been found to give more people at different times of the day their parole. And when do you think they give out the most parole? After breakfast and lunch. When do they give out virtually no parole? Just before lunch and at the end of the day, when they're hungry. And the reason they do this is because they're low on fuel. So their brain kicks in the just take the easy answer process, and their job is to look at a person who has committed crimes and decide if they're safe for release. The easy answer to that is always no. I mean, you already know they've committed a crime. The tougher answer would require you to think deeply, to dig for evidence of change, to dialogue with the group or the individual, to imagine scenarios that this parolee might encounter. All sorts of energy-consuming jobs that just get ignored when we're hungry. But here's the biggest part. Zezik would love this. When you ask the parole boards why they offer less parole during these periods of the day when they're hungry, they'll give you any answer but because they're hungry, because that's an awful answer that plays as selfish, lazy, and incredibly problematic. Deciding parole based on the decider's blood sugar level. Yikes. So yeah, we're liars, mostly to ourselves. Zezik is also a psychoanalyst of sorts, which sounds complicated, but all it means is that he's assuming what I just said, that humans give super simple answers to super complicated questions all the time, and that those answers are super wrong, but that we lie to ourselves to keep convincing ourselves that they're good enough. Why did you cut that guy off on the way to work? Well, not because you didn't have breakfast and you had a bad call with your girlfriend last night, plus you're not looking forward to talking to your jerk boss. No, you'll say you cut him off because he was a jerk. End of story. Is that a lion in the bushes? It's a good thing I told myself that simple story about cutting that guy off, or else I might have been too busy thinking about it to notice the lion and save my own life. All that to say that Zizek is going quite a bit deeper than just saying that our desires are reflected in our media in a way that blurs them out just enough to make them all purpose and relatable to people of different backgrounds, beliefs, and understandings of the world. He's saying that we also don't even know what we're doing with most of these pieces of media most of the time. We are the parole boards, just kind of feeling a certain way about each film or piece of art, and we don't ever really get to the bottom of why we feel the way we feel. We instead take the easy answer. I like Fast and Furious because it's got lots of fast cars, not because it's a patriarchal, sexist reminder that people who look like me can get away with breaking the law. I enjoy Shawshank because Andy eventually gets his freedom, not because I have some unconscious desire to enjoy the domination of others via the medium of video. So we often can't even get the real reason media speaks to us, even when we notice that it speaks to us. And as if all this isn't confusing enough, Zizek is also talking about the fact that our media both reflects cultural norms, but also that it creates cultural norms, that we reflect it back. Our movies reflect our culture, and then our culture reflects our movies. And he isn't just talking about a Transformers display outside Universal Studios or a million Minions t-shirts at middle schools across the country. I mean, that's part of it, but good media hijacks us and makes us pay attention. It steals our attention, our interests, our love. Good political movements are the same way. And his point about using Jaws to understand the Nazi movement of the early 20th century is maybe his clearest use of this metaphor. Jaws boiled all of the audience's cultural fears down into a shark. For religious folks, the shark could be the devil, just out of sight yet operating to destroy lives from beneath. For capitalists, the shark could have been communism lurking beneath the surface, waiting to pounce on unsuspecting beachgoers who have paid for a good day and destroy their good time. For liberals or communists, the shark could have represented capitalism, promising a great day at a paid beach, but then unleashing its unchallengeable power on consumers who lack the ability to fight back. The shark, says Zizek, maps onto a bunch of complicated problems and melts them down into a single entity that can be defeated. The first point I made about letting the audience apply their own pre-existing understanding of the world. Hitler did the same thing by mapping all of Germany's social ills onto the Jewish people. A gross simplification to a complicated problem every bit as fantastical and ridiculous as Jaws was. And you can look to institutions like religion that do the same thing. They allow us all to bring our own personal problems, concerns, fears, and dreams, and to go to a single medium, say Christianity, and to feel as if we're all in agreement, all focused on the same story for our own individual issues. School is another medium that allows children from all sorts of backgrounds, religions, socioeconomic statuses, all sorts of different life goals. It lets them all find their own links to the content and use it to make sense of their own private worlds. Now, the last thing to add, Zizek sees the current ideology of so-called Western culture as firmly rooted in capitalism. Our ideologies offer us simple answers to complicated questions so we can save our limited attention for other things. But the simple answers our ideology often provides are ridiculous. He uses examples like welfare moms being scapegoated for inner city poverty as if it's their fault. And he walks us through the way capitalism requires things that don't make sense if you just stop to think about them. But just like all ideologies, we don't stop to think about them. We use capitalism as a quick answer to complicated questions. And because we use it that way, it leads us to awful answers. Barbie is a fantasy, but it's also reality because I can buy it at Walmart and because Mattel is raking in millions of dollars in profit from our claim that it is a fantasy. Even if you embrace Barbie as a complete fictional fantasy and ignore all the connections to the real world, as Zizek makes clear, it's an awful fantasy. It's full of cliches, ignorance, stagnating culture, unrealized potential, and whatever happiness we pretend to place there to put in that space where consumerism doesn't work and where patriarchy isn't real, this claim that at least Barbie land isn't corrupted with these things like the real world, Well, as we saw in the film, there's no barrier to these threats embedding themselves and taking root so fast that they virtually destroy the fantasy land in days and force us, the viewers, to see just how much work we all put into preventing those same potentially toxic forces, patriarchy in the case of Barbie Land, from destroying our real world. Now, again, the goal of this week's assignment is to simply start to recognize the connections between our beliefs and our media, between what we think and what we see. So give yourself permission to struggle at times with Zizek and with ideology. This is all a mouthful. And again, remember, our real goal is just to see media reflecting reality back at us in a way that distorts it and makes it appear fantastic. Yet, when you look closely, you can also see that the fantasy is just as, if not more, problematic than the real world. Now, as you start to think about how this theory applies to your own life, consider Christmas decorations and the rituals of Christmas in the United States. Zizek taught us that we use cozy, shiny platitudes, ideological claims, to describe things in our life that would normally be more accurately described by their true shape, their true cost. Our stories about why we do what we do are simplified descriptions pulled from ideological truths that we take for granted without really thinking about it. So the ideological story we tell ourselves about Christmas is in how we deck the halls with aphorisms of peace on earth, joy, love, Merry Christmas, and in how we tell our kids that their good behavior, their goodwill towards men, that it'll be rewarded by a magic man who suffers from none of capitalism's shortages or inequalities. He can deliver tons of toys to your kid and still have plenty for all the other kids, even those who can't afford anything. Yay! But if we ask Zizek to tell us what that ideology hides, he'd probably point out that Christmas is a holiday where we ignore our larger communities in favor of giving tons of expensive junk that nobody needs to members of our immediate social group. He'd point to Santa and tell us that we only use that story to avoid the truth, that we're going to spend a bunch of money on presents that will only be used a couple times by kids who have acted like monsters for the last year, and those gifts, or rather the money we use to buy them, will come at the expense of other projects that could be furthered in the world, like solving world hunger or making sure every kid gets a present this year. We preach love, joy, and goodwill to hide the real reason for the season, unencumbered capitalist consumption.